Hello Silly Talks music fans! Great to have you back with me and my guest this week. Welcome to the Encore episode with Pilani Bubu, a South African singer-songwriter and storyteller, taking her Folklore project to the world. Have you listened to the first part of the interview? In the Silly Talk, Pilani has painted the big picture of South African music today and explained how what she does fits within it. Having that foundation, in this part of our convo, we're diving a bit more into Pilani's musical journey, past and present, and looking into the future of her newest project. Bear in mind though that we spoke a few months ago already, so whenever either of us says this year, we're referring to 2023. So this time let's start with the question about Pilani's beginnings as a musician, and when it stopped being just a hobby.
So that first EP was 2012, which was kind of like my demo EP. The funny thing is I re-recorded that whole EP and I never released the second bit. Long story about just being independent and finding it really expensive. 2011, I quit my corporate job. So I've always been with music. So I think far back as I can remember, I fell in love with music when I was about 9 years old. I remember specifically my parents and I used to always go on these road trips and they'd play all these tapes from Tracy Chapman to Bob Marley to the Cranberries, all kinds of like from pop to folk music. They weren't very jazz lovers. And then I kind of played instruments from that age, the recorder, marimbas, and then kind of the longest instrument I played was the violin. So music has always been a part of my life. I'm also a twin, so my twin sister and I just always used to come home and love to sing, play together. And yes, and then when we got to middle school, high school, we used to sing in 3 different groups. By the time we got to university, we were in like 3 or 4 different groups: the national choir, the folk group, a jazz chamber choir, Lafeki chant. And music has just always been with me, even till my first job. And during university, I think our parents, coming out of like the struggle, education was prized as like kind of like the thing that would afford the future and secure the future for us, and that they fought so hard for us to have these opportunities. So it was very difficult to kind of make that choice as a child, but also as someone who was like an academic. It was like a really good balance between the arts and academics for me. It was almost very challenging for them to even ask me to choose, but I think the pressure came from like grandfather to my father. And so I even studied 2 degrees in 5 years because I was trying to prove my smarts, like the pressure of a post-apartheid child or post-colonial child is just like really overachieving. And so I went on and I worked in advertising instead of going into law after I finished, because it was a little bit more creative and I could just kind of do stuff that was a lot more colorful. And then about 2011, I was working at a brewery as a strategist, and it's like I just couldn't lie anymore. I don't know. I think there was this kind of like this strong spiritual shift, but it also began with a heartbreak, which is why the first project is called Journey of a Heart. It was just a download of like the relationship I was in. And that's why the second one's called Warrior of Light, was kind of coming into that light and that spiritual shift and understanding my purpose in the music. And I think, even though I grew up in apartheid and I'm a Black child in South Africa, I always like to say that I jumped off the shoulder of giants and I was almost quite privileged. If I needed a violin, my dad was able to buy it and I'd be able to be in the orchestra. If I needed to go on a school choir tour traveling the world, he'd be able to buy 2 tickets for me and my twin, and have us travel and sing choir of the world in like Austria or, Italy. And so I think what happened with me is that I felt music was a gift that I needed to give freely. And growing up in the church as well, you kind of just you don't want to commercialize it. And so it took me a long time to grasp the idea of this becoming like a career or like the number one thing that I do, until there was a sense of urgency in my own story. And there was a sense of urgency in what I felt at the time was kind of the new age enlightenment, which I was experiencing for myself. And I wanted to be a part of those people who could, I guess, empower others and inspire others using their first talent. So music is like my number one thing. So why would I not begin to do my purpose through music first? So how do I like share of myself and these things and my thoughts and these words and these shifts in consciousness if I can't use my first talent? And so I was having these shifts and I was growing and I was like moving, and music had to be the one thing I used first. I mean, I always say to people I can speak as much as I sometimes think I can speak better than I can sing. Growth happens, but I'd rather, it's a balance for me now. I can speak it or sing it, but I wanted to use the talent of music. It's been the one that I love the most first. So 2011, I quit my job, and it's been 12 years, right? So since my first 12 years?
Yeah.
So that was, it's 2023. It's 12 years or something. Since I've, taken music as the number one thing in my life and my number one career.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. So you studied law, amongst
I
others.
did.
Okay.
I did
Right.
law and BCom. So it was like a BCom LLB. So it was business commerce with a bit of law, and then you finish it off with like LLB. So it's like 2 degrees
Yeah.
in 5 years.
So, but I
Yeah.
guess that helps a bit in what you do, because as far as I understand, you're an independent artist and you're self-managed still, correct? So you have,
Yes, correct.
so, I always ask people who are, independent artists, how do you guys embrace it all? Because, like there's this creative bit of being a musician, which is probably the one that you kind of enjoy the most. But then there's the business side of music, obviously, where you have to do things that probably you're either not skilled at or you're not really fond of, So like I guess because you studied law, then you can read through contracts quickly and you understand, like what's going on, like what people want from you and stuff like that. Or if you studied BCom, then probably you're good at advertising and you worked in advertising as well, and that side as well. So it's really good because it all comes together in the end, I think.
Do you know it did? It really has. It's been coming together quite beautifully. It's also like such a crazy thing when you come from an overachieving family. Just embracing the simple things, like when people stopped calling me, "Oh, you're the marketer or the strategist," which I was really good at what I did. I still choose which clients I can help here and there, but because it's another way of telling a story. I really enjoy communication and advertising and just how things come alive. And it's true, I think all the business acumen and the not being afraid of a document and paperwork.
Yeah.
It's hard, but just not being afraid of it, and also not being afraid to broach certain conversations. And I think at the core of it as an independent artist is being able to represent yourself. There's a lot to be said about that, and I'm very grateful that I kind of did take a bit of a detour. At first it was a bit of like oh, she doesn't take it seriously. You really feel bad and guilty that you didn't really go to music school, but I did music school all my life through my extramural activities, through playing instruments, through just being there all the time with music.
Yeah.
School of life.
Ah, the famous School of Life, the finest institution one can possibly attend, whether you're a musician or not. So we know now that Pilani is a self-taught muso, but that's not the only intriguing part of her story. She started her adventure in music in a genre slightly different from the one she represents now. So let's inquire a bit more about that definite shift that can even be spotted in the order of releases on the artist's music streaming platforms. Going back to your back catalog, right? So I listened to it and I can see, there's you from between 2012 and 2018 it is. And then there is like a big shift as far as I understand it. And you start singing in your languages, or like in different languages as well, which are not English. But I still kind of have this impression that there are like two sides of you. So there's the Pilani, like just kind of like the girl next door that sings about love and longing and stuff, like this kind of a bit more contemporary pop-ish, let's say, kind of vibe. And then there's the Pilani, like the spiritual leader who is kind of immersed in nature, and like in the culture and folklore. So what happened in 2018? Because I can see that this is where this kind of shift happened, whereas at least when it comes to, like the releases, was there any particular event, that kind of made you maybe not change your mind, but kind of explore a different side of, kind of you being a musician?
Amazing. You literally locked the timeline. I think 2018 was the official shift.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
it was more like 2017. I saw a poster my mom kept, which was like just coming back full circle. So let me tell you the story. It was a progression. It was like a 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. It was a 5-year progression. So it happened over time.
Okay.
So when I recorded my first EP, I traveled to New Orleans as like my first destination at the time. I was like done. I was tired of traveling without a demo, and I was there, and I'd literally just finished recording the project. We just been done. 2 days later, I was on a flight with these CDs, and I was supposed to stay. It was a jazz fest, and I was supposed to stay about 5 days in New Orleans for the New Orleans Jazz Fest, and I stayed about 3 months.
Wow.
And this is because I was like in this window of like, I guess what they call in The Alchemist, the beginner's luck.
Mm-hmm.
So you quit your job and then you like do the thing you love, and then the doors just open. And I was there, and like the most incredible things happened. I was on stage with like Kermit Ruffins, John Batiste, Irvin Mayfield. It was like crazy. Some of the best musicians in New Orleans. And it was buzzing, and it felt like such a safe ground of musicians to explore a bit of myself. And so in the 3 months, outside of kind of like being immersed in the jazz world and like my love for brass music, which is what you hear in Warrior of Light.
Mm-hmm.
And in Warrior of Light, I also get invited to France with a group of 8 folk artists from around the world. And we're like camping out in the Pyrenees, and we're writing this project together. This is where songs like Warrior of Light and like the ability to feel like I could love, do you know what I mean? Girl Next Door, still there, present, telling like an honest story about just like love, an honest story about like my love for music, an honest story about like feeling like heaven is here on earth, an honest story about my own esoteric spirituality. And then every year since I went to New Orleans in 2012, so 2012 went to New Orleans and then went to New York Film Academy to study there, like end of that year, came back to New Orleans, and New Orleans is like one of the most African cities in America.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to like, I'm digging in straight, like we're trying to remind myself, because I've been thinking about it quite a lot, going back full circle, because I saw a poster my mom kept and it said, "Out of Africa, folklore." And it was when I first conceptualized this thing. And I didn't know what it was. I thought I wanted to do it with my family. In fact, I invited them to New Orleans in 2017, and we had this big fight. And it's like they weren't ready. I wasn't sure, but I just kind of knew it was time to like tell our stories in this way. And I wrote these like 3 different captions around documenting our own history, telling our own stories, owning our own narrative. And I think the American culture, and New Orleans specifically being so African, the most African city in America, and learning about how they connect to like the Mardi Gras Indians and how spiritual that is and where that came from, arriving at Congo Square where all the slaves gathered, and how kind of New Orleans becomes the birthplace of jazz, and how the Zionist influences and all the different East African cultures came together. And I myself have like these apostolic Zionist influences, because like those are churches that I go to, you know, like I came from a Zionist church this morning. And essentially it made me feel the universality of self. I think of myself as being an African woman. I think when you kind of hear watching an entertainment industry in America and that being the most popular, like that's pop. Do you know, it's what comes out of America, that's pop. And just being on the other side and traveling and looking back and going, I have like such a unique story to tell. And it just, people also wanted it more and more. So I started infusing these folk songs into my set. So when I did my first solo show ever, and I had this love for poetry, and I felt like I hadn't recorded it into the music, and I wanted to fuse it, and I loved storytelling. It just started. So Journey of a Heart, actually the first solo show, was infused with a bit of folklore, like Qongqothwane and Wadidi Elunongala. I dug really deep into my roots to just share a balanced story. So it was birthed from traveling and being in New Orleans, and like really looking at how precious other people are trying to understand and see Africanness, and that I had such a strong opportunity to be a part of those people who are definitively sharing that, defining that, articulating it, because art is all about like articulating something. And I have the power of articulation. And I also found that I could really, I mean, I think being a strategist, you always have to be the one who unpacks what something is before like the creatives come up with the tagline. You you're the first tagline. You come up with the first strap line or campaign line. And so even within the music, I found ways to be that person who's able to say, this is what this is about, and unpacking it, this is what it's saying to me. And I wanted to dig deeper and go, what do these songs mean anyway? Why, everyone wants to dance to Tongo when Mirriam Makeba does it. At that time, her biggest job was being an activist and not so much a culturalist. But inevitably, her activism led us back to the culture. Mm-hmm. What is our job now? I felt like is to really define and to put our map and our names and our culture into it. So I was like, I'm going to understand, why is the dung beetle the healer of the road? Why did we have to say that? And listening to stories that my dad told me about our first spirituality, Kamata, before colonialism, before Christianity, and just like digging into our own God. And I just found such a deep space. And it all happened between that time in New Orleans. I went back 2012, I went back 2013, I went back 2014, then I went back 15, and then 17, I went with my family and I said, right, let's try this. So we performed together there. And it was initially, we were like toying around between the names Folklore, out of Africa, whatever, and then found opportunities to kind of like explore the music in that way. And then the shift happened. I just got out of my own nerves, stopped thinking that other African kids are going to judge me, particularly South Africans who I felt took their own culture for granted. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to be like, why is she singing these songs? And I took a huge leap of faith. It's never given me more nerves. I was very nervous. I was very anxious about the project. So for it to kind of have done what it's done, and also, even just, it was the first project I'd ever like submitted for any awards in South Africa. And then it won the South African Music Award. And so it's such an interesting thing, right time, right place. It's the right time. It's just like that shift is there for all of us. And now we all, like, when you come here, you're literally going to be like, all of South African music is about spirituality. It's just like spectrums of gospel. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like the new way in which we're coming out is just like the rediscoveries about a connection to our ancestors. It's about intuiting and getting into the spirit and downloading what already exists and still in the ether of like what still lives in the ancient, and that's sounds, that's instrumentation, that's music. So yeah, that shift did happen. Like, and I think you're spot on. 2018, I had the guts to start recording. I recorded Bumte and Baile. And yes, they were like modern stories, but looking back into the history of our culture and why, these two stories of women needed to be told. And what about the culture we needed to undo? And what about the culture we needed to re-celebrate? Our value system, Black families that were destroyed during this time of like colonialism. And then, medleyed with like all these traditional folk songs I wanted to unpack. Chapter 2 is me writing from the place that I'd learned. So it's quite like mostly original music.
I don't know how about you, but I can't really get over that New Orleans episode in Pilani's life. If you're a muso who loves jazz, it must be the coolest thing on earth to share the stage with all these amazing musos. Like John Baptiste. I mean, come on, I'm even jealous. And I only sing in the shower. But on a bit of a different note now. If you've listened to this podcast before, you'll know that I treat it as a learning curve for up-and-coming musos in a sense. Hence, my interest is also in finding out how independent creators from all around the world carve their own paths in the music biz, without the support of big money and, many times, the resources of major music companies. In my humble opinion, Pilani's been able to do it in a super structured and well thought out way. Here's how she's making it all happen.
So for me, I did come out leaving corporate going that I was going to use some of my other talents to basically help me with my number one talent.
Okay.
And I think I also walked out of working or being able to understand sort of business and corporate with the idea of like time, the time value equation, and going, well, I'm not going to spend the bulk of my time singing every day or recording all the time. So how do I work out my prioritization matrix and what time period it is? So there are times that I mark out as times to kind of like, I guess you could call it raise money. I don't do crowdfunding, but I work to raise money. And
Okay.
in the beginning, I went, so same time I went to New York Film Academy, just like the year later, I did interior design. So design was like my second love and design language, because strategy was also moving into design thinking. And I just, yeah, wanted to explore that and go, maybe I could own a business that does design and then I could do music. So at least I'm like decorating and I'm still working with something really exciting and stuff. And so I did that. And that kind of moved from not just a business to more, because the more popular become as someone as an artist, you kind of you have to move away from residential. You have to do corporate. So I mostly do like brands and corporate or unique projects in interiors, but I focus more on my television show now. So I decided to do content more. So for the last 5 years or so, yeah, 5 years, 6 years, I've been doing this design show called Design for You with Pilani Bubu. And yeah, on one of the channels, satellite channels here. And that's been like a way to kind of like have that secondary thing, a secondary passion working for me. I also didn't throw away marketing. I
Mm-hmm.
just I shifted. So I decided that I'll freelance and basically give some of my time to clients who needed it or needed my skill set, which was very diverse. And that skill set includes strategy, executive production, producer, to so I'll do campaign management from top to tail, running like teams of like 60 people. I'm currently on a job right now because I was like, who's gonna pay for all these album launches? And but I have this guardian angel client who always, well, I have different clients, and
Mm-hmm.
they always like, are you in the country? Are you traveling? Are you touring? And they don't care where I am in the world. It's just like I learned how to use my time. So for my first job, I used to run like 5 different projects. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and because in advertising, you have to fill in a timesheet. You have to write, like, I spent 3 hours on Vodacom and I spent 4 hours on Nokia and I did 3 hours with Cadbury's, and that's how they billing your time out. But then they're getting most of the money. So I learned that I could have most of the money, run my own taxes, start my own businesses, become a member of all the collecting societies, and just figure out the ecosystem. And so it's been this amount of years figuring out the ecosystem. It took me about halfway mark, so halfway to 10 years, 5 years in, to fully let music pay for itself. So
Mm-hmm.
initially, it was like, I'm aware that I'm using money from other sources to just like throw at music. And it was okay that it was other sources because I made all my mistakes in the beginning and it was like stressful. And sometimes I go into studio, I couldn't even sing because my throat would be sore. I'd be so stressed. I'd be like, oh my God, it's so expensive to record, especially when I started taking over the process myself as music director versus like working with a very like efficient producer, do you know? And yeah, and so I continued that. And so I kind of had this model of going, well, it seems there's a pattern in my life. 6 months of the year I can dedicate to giving something back to South Africa. I can choose the clients, I can choose what my good work is going to be, and I can also just like use that time to perform. Then 6 months of the year I'd generally be traveling. So I had this like kind of 6 months in, 6 months out. And when I'm in, it's easier to kind of like fill in the gaps and just consult or give some of my brain space to other people. So I still do give some of my brain space to other people. It does relieve like, my lifestyle and like other needs like family requirements or things that I've had to take on as well, just responsibilities. And it keeps me at peace. I think there's nothing more stressful than just like not being able to do what you need to do. There was a year like 2019, big shift. I almost like went back to corporate. They wanted me to be the editor of the House and Home or Condé Nast magazine and in interior design and not in like music. It's not like I'm running a music blog, whatever. But like it was just a shift that I was going through and just like not being able to finish my project because I didn't have all the money raised. I was just like making enough from when music started paying for itself to like doing interior design. And I think, yeah, so I would say that from anyone who wants to kind of like take anything away from what I've been doing, is that time is like time and days are these choices we make. We make a choice to spend time and we make a choice as to how we spend our days. And I think for me, no one day is the same because I'm making these different choices. There's a lot of diversity, and I exercise my versatility, and I have diversified, yes, through having started somewhere else and landed up here, but I don't deny that, like, I do need something to feed some of the other things. I just prioritize how I can spend more time with music. And I spend a lot of time with music. You would think, because my time is mine. I'm not really like clocking into a job. I'm not going to work. I'm just deciding to use my mind in different ways. Do you know?
Okay, not to exaggerate, but I reckon we can all agree that Pilani has done some pretty incredible stuff in her life, in the music space and beyond it. So, to finish our convo, I fired the question that is a bit cheeky and a bit tricky. And I realized it's also a little unfair to ask it in the context of everything that's already happened and everything that will happen but is impossible to predict. But I asked that question anyway. What is the number one highlight from Pilani's adventures in the music land so far? Or is there still an unfulfilled dream on the horizon?
And so I look back and I remember reminding myself that the big or the small wins, like, there are significant highlights happening already. From the first project, my first one was having my song on the radio. I think like it was on 26 at the time. There weren't too many radio stations because they were quite racially segregated in South Africa before. And now it's like they're starting to be a little bit more diverse. And I had my first song, Misunderstood, on radio, and like hearing myself on radio for the first time. In fact, actually, I would say a highlight was discovering like what was unique about my voice, because I've sung all my life. And singing will never not make me nervous, because singers always want to sound nice. But more and more, I just wanted to sound like myself. Do you know? And I remember when I recorded with this producer, RJ Benjamin, and he said to me, I said to him, what are people going to, like, what is it about the music? Are we getting to the right place? Where are we going? And he said, listen to this. And I had never heard my vibrato. Do you know that is the craziest thing? Because I'm sure you've heard how heavy my vibrato is. It is. It's not even a bird. I feel like it's like an owl, and it's got the biggest wings, which is unusual and unnerving. And like when you grow up in the pop space, everyone says, clean up the vibrato. And then allowing myself to have a jazz sensibility and going to the New York Film Academy and having more teachers, people who are in New York doing this as a career, telling me that this is unique and you should use it. Lean into these people. Yes, your voice seems like it's stuck in time, but like you can always use it bringing forward. That was a highlight for me, hearing myself for the first time through recorded music, and then learning to love my own voice in a specific way and finding my way and my style. And two was hearing my first song ever on the radio. And then like the one that I talk about the most was definitely my time in New Orleans. I think it like really formed so much for me in music. And I write about it in the song Music Love, where the moment I decided never to turn back, I said, this is more than just a phase. This is my place in this life. I'll always be where the music lives. There's no place I'd rather be. And it's like floating in like heavenly sounds, right? It's like I'm floating on notes and tones. I'm leaving the minor behind. And I'm singing on a major scale. And I never since looked back. So I think New Orleans is like the fundamental musical highlight of my life, in the way that it changed me, in the way that it showed me a lot about myself, in the way, like you said, it really birthed. It became the place that I went back to trial new things. It became a safe space in music. It became an explorative place. And also looking around and going, in the world of music, I belong here. Like I am like singing with all these amazing musicians. This is no mistake. I just got to get my act together and like keep going. And I know that was too far back because that was 2012, but that definitely would have been a really significant highlight. So it depends on you if you want to hear three more: winning a South African Music Award, performing at Musique Matisse in France just before Angela Kidjo on the main stage, and going, this is where I want to be. With a full band of guys singing all the music, like in harmony, like Ladysmith Black Mambazo, whilst playing the instruments. Definitely a highlight. And then launching my own festival.
And on that pretty high note, I would say, let's end the interview here. And I just want to say many thanks to Pilani Bubu for this enriching conversation about her country, culture and music. I secretly hope her words will come true, and I'll make it to South Africa one day to experience it all firsthand. Fingers crossed. If this conversation has intrigued you, please support Pilani and her craft by visiting her channels, listed in the show notes. Her album Folklore Chapter 2 Ekuseni is out now on all platforms too. And as tradition has it on this show, you'll hear a sample of one of her songs from that album after the music jingle has finished, at the end of this episode. I also recommend attending Pilani's show if she's touring in your region of the world. You won't regret it, I promise. Additionally, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't plug my own content here. Just a reminder that you can find me as at Silly McWiggles on all socials. Feel free to browse my sillymcwiggles.blog and my Silly McWiggles YouTube channel. If you see something worth sharing, commenting on, or simply liking, please don't be shy and do it. It means the world to me, literally, when I see that people engage with my passion and my first love, which is music. Following, subscribing to and recommending this podcast to your friends, family and whoever else you think might benefit from the topics I've covered over the years is also very welcome. And the last thing I want to mention here is this. Everything you hear on this podcast is made by moi, 100%. I produce it from A to Z with little resources, which is equally a blessing and a curse. So if any of you listeners can hook me up with a sponsor or a cool creative collab, I'll be grateful forever. Just putting it out there, just in case. Thanks heaps for listening today. Stay tuned for new episodes coming real soon.